In the headlines, in one of the biggest shifts in Japan's defense policy since the Second World War, the country lifts the ban on its right to exercise collective self-defense. South Korea reacts to North Korea's recent overture, and it's a negative one. Seoul called for Pyongyang's denuclearization first. And Korea's June exports grow 2.5% on year, putting the first half's export volume at a record high. But a strong Korean won is watched.
Hello and welcome to Primetime News. I'm Sean Lim.
Welcome to the show. I'm Kang Tae-ri. We begin with a landmark decision out of Japan, where the cabinet there has given its okay for a significant shift in military policy.
Gone is a decades-long ban on the right to collective self-defense, meaning Japanese troops will now be allowed to fight overseas in defense of allies. Our Song Ji-sun reports on the implications.
A ban that dates back to the end of World War II lifted. In a significant recasting of military policy away from its pacifist policies, the Abe administration has reclaimed the right to send its soldiers into battle even when the country is not under direct attack. Following approval by lawmakers on Tuesday, the cabinet adopted a resolution dropping a ban that has kept the military from fighting overseas since World War II. This means Japanese troops will be able to come to the aid of allies if they come under attack from a common enemy, even if Japan is not the subject of the attack. Tokyo will also be able to take on a greater role in UN peacekeeping missions.
For the sake of world stability and peace, Japan will contribute more than it has up to this point.
After losing World War II, Japan was forced to dismantle its military and adopt a constitution that allows the use of arms only in the event it is attacked on its territory. But interpretations of the constitution have since been stretched over the years to allow for the strengthening of Japan's self-defense forces. Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has been aggressively pursuing the change since taking office. But Korea and China, major victims of Japan's past wartime aggression, have expressed opposition.
The Japanese government must proceed in a transparent manner that guarantees peace and stability in the region. And at the same time, it must also earn its neighbors' trust by putting an end to its distortion of past wrongdoings.
South Korea's foreign ministry has said the Japanese forces will not be allowed on the Korean peninsula without prior consent. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News.
Nonsense and insincere. That's how South Korea has labeled a proposal by North Korea to end all cross-border hostilities. Seoul said peace on the Korean peninsula can only be realized once Pyongyang takes serious steps to dismantle its nuclear program. Hwang Sung-hee reports.
South Korea rejected on Tuesday North Korea's so-called special proposal to end all military hostilities between the two Koreas. On Monday, the North proposed to halt cross-border slandering and military provocations starting Friday and called for upcoming joint military drills between Seoul and Washington to be canceled. Sound familiar? The regime had made a similar proposal earlier this year in what it called an important proposal.
North Korea proposed in January to end cross-border slandering but broke the inter-Korean agreement shortly thereafter, and has been hurling offensive remarks at our leader and launching provocations ever since.
Calling the latest proposal nonsense and insincere, Seoul's Unification Ministry said North Korea's nuclear and missile development programs are the biggest threats on the Korean peninsula. The ministry said North Korea must let go of its nuclear program if it really wants lasting peace in the region. On what had motivated Pyongyang to make the sudden proposal, an official at the ministry said the regime may have been attempting to show its efforts at mending inter-Korean ties ahead of Chinese President Xi Jinping's visit to Seoul this week. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
High-level officials from North Korea and Japan sat down for talks in Beijing on this Tuesday to hammer out the details of a previous agreement that promises to reopen an investigation into the abductions of Japanese nationals decades ago. This meeting went ahead despite speculation that Japan might pull out in protest of North Korea's launch of two short-range missiles over this weekend. Our Yurian reports.
Tuesday's high-level meeting between Japan and North Korea began with an exchange of strong words over Pyongyang's firing of two short-range missiles into the East Sea between the two nations over the weekend. In his opening remarks, Japan's chief delegate to the talks, Junichi Ihara, launched a strong protest against the launch, calling it a violation of UN Security Council resolutions. His North Korean counterpart Song Il-ho said Pyongyang has made it clear that they do not recognize the resolutions and insisted that the test firings were safe and fully consistent with maintaining peace and stability in the region. Despite the tensions, the two countries did agree to continue constructive talks on reinvestigating the abduction of Japanese nationals by North Korean agents in the 1970s and 80s. In a diplomatic breakthrough, the two countries struck a deal in Stockholm last month on reopening the abduction probe. In return, Japan has promised to lift some sanctions and resume humanitarian aid to North Korea. Pyongyang on Tuesday reportedly briefed Japan about the special investigative team it has assembled to look into the Japanese abductee issue. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is looking over the details and is expected to decide on Wednesday whether his government will lift partial sanctions on the communist state, and if so, to what scale. Yurian, Arirang News.
Your gateway to the day's biggest stories in Korea and around the world. Breaking news, the hottest interviews, and a whole lot more. Join Arirang Sean Lim and Kang Che-ri from the heart of Seoul.
Begins now.
Primetime news, weeknights, live at 10 on Arirang TV.
Korean exports in the first half of the year enjoyed record numbers, with shipments of mobile communications devices and semiconductors to advanced economies leading the way. But as our Connie Kim reports, the numbers may gloss over some weak areas of the Korean economy.
Korea's exports hit a new record high in terms of dollar value in the first half of this year, backed by the recovery in major economies. That means Korea sold close to $2.3 billion worth of goods overseas every day, up 4.5% on year. Exports to advanced economies played a major role in the jump. Shipments to the European Union rose by more than 11%, and those to the United States inched up about 8%. Shipments of mobile communication devices saw the steepest gains, followed by semiconductors and steel. But some experts are not excited about the data, as it's not as rosy as it sounds.
The 2.6% rise in exports is lower than expected. Emerging economies are catching up quickly with Korean technology, which still lags behind advanced nations. The strengthening of the won was also a factor in the lowering of the nation's total exports.
The strong Korean won, which is hurting Korean exporters' price competitiveness overseas, is a factor that kept the trade performance from meeting expectations. The Korean won gained more than 3% against the dollar in the first 6 months of this year. And it's a major culprit that's hurting the outlook for the Korean economy.
We were expecting exports to increase about 5 to 6% this year. But with the 2.6% growth in exports in the first half of this year, the growth rate is not expected to pick up. The export growth for this year is not expected to reach 5%.
Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Korea's stock market is losing momentum, with the benchmark Kospi fluctuating by the smallest margin ever in the first 6 months of this year. Analysts mainly blame slowing economic growth at home, which has a strong link to the slowing Chinese economy. Our Hwang Ji-ae tells us more.
It's as if the Korean stock market has had its pause button pushed. The Korea Exchange says the nation's benchmark Kospi is losing its vitality, with market volatility in the first half of the year hitting a mere 0.6, its lowest point since 1990 when the market first opened. The closer the index is to zero, the more stagnant the market. The figure was at over 2 in the second half of 2011, but has continued on a downward trend ever since. And it's not just the dynamism, but also the number of transactions that remains subdued. The average daily transactions volume on the nation's main bourse came in at around 23 million in the first half of this year, marking the lowest level in 7.5 years. Analysts attribute the lackluster performance over the past 3 years to sluggish domestic demand and the slowing Chinese economy.
Korea is heavily dependent on exports to China. The nation's industries are also closely linked to those in China, so the slumping economy there had a major impact on the economy here.
Analysts add that the recent strength in the local currency trend has eroded the profitability of local companies and is keeping the stock market from perking up, but they also forecast better conditions in the second half. They say the global economy, more importantly the U.S. economy, is on a rebound trend, which will result in more robust exports for Korea, eventually raise local corporate profitability and put some pep in the stock market's step. 황지혜, Arirang News.
Scientists around the world have tried and failed to find a cure for Alzheimer's disease since its discovery in 1906. But now a Korean research team has identified the cause of memory loss from this most common form of dementia, which could open up gateways to treatment of the fatal brain disease. Kwon So-hwa explains.
In a scene from the Korean movie A Moment to Remember, a young woman suffering from Alzheimer's can't find her way home due to memory loss brought on by the disease, which doesn't just steal one's memory, but is fatal and incurable. But now, a Korean research team has discovered the source of what leads to the loss of memory in Alzheimer's, which is raising hopes of opening a new chapter in the development of treatments. The cause of the impairment, researchers say, lies in the so-called reactive astrocytes that develop once the brain is affected by the disease. Astrocytes are the most abundant cell type in the brain, and reactive astrocytes produce an acid called gamma-aminobutyric, or GABA. They found that these acids in affected mice began to produce abnormally large amounts of GABA. An experiment showed that mice that were injected with an inhibitor called selegiline, which suppresses the generation of GABA, regained their memories. However, after more than 2 weeks during which the injections were administered, the effects disappeared, which calls for the next step in the research process.
We found that the effects of selegiline grow weaker when it is taken in for a long time. We are currently working on the development of 3 kinds of inhibitors with long-lasting efficacy.
The research, supported by the Korea Institute of Science and Technology, has been published in the highly cited medical journal Nature Medicine. Kwon So-hwa, Arirang News.
In today's in-depth segment, we're talking about Korea's latest UNESCO treasure, which is Namhan Sansong. And for this conversation, we have Professor Choi Jae-hun, who actually flew out for this UNESCO meeting in Qatar this past week and joining us right here in this studio. Professor, thanks so much for coming in today.
Thanks for inviting me.
So let's first ask you how the mood there was like.
Oh, actually, Doha, Qatar is really hot.
Okay, that's
that is desert area. The city is all under construction.
So Namhan Sansong, it's known as a fortress. It's also known as a place to go hiking, for eating out. What were the main criteria, though, that really secured this place on the UNESCO heritage list?
Actually, you should understanding the criteria for the World Heritage inscription. We have 10 criteria showing the outstanding universal values, and the criteria 1 to 6 applying for the cultural heritage, and the criteria 7 to 10 is applying for the natural heritage. Namhansansong fulfill the criteria 2 and criteria 4. The criteria 2 is emphasized the interchange of human values, and the criteria number 4 is emphasizing the showing the clear evidence of the development stage in the human history. Another matter is that Namhansansong is functioned as an emergence capital for Joseon dynasty in the case of the foreign invasion. You already know the Pyongyang, the Korean and the Qing dynasty battles happened in the Namhansansong. So Namhansansong was a battleground for that great war.
So you're saying that literally this thing is a true symbol of Korea's sovereignty?
Sure, sure. This is actually a symbol of our national identity. The interesting thing I found while I'm writing a dossier, then after Korean War, that time Korean government has no money. But the first they invest the repair for the heritage was Namhansansong. Why? Because it was a symbol of national sovereignty and identity.
I see. Now, what does this UNESCO treasure status mean from here on? I mean, are we talking about any changes to the management of Namhansansong from here on?
No, there are no such changes. It's the same. Actually, designated as a UNESCO World Heritage, we call it inscribed on the World Heritage list. Does not make any changes. Namhansansong is totally protected by the domestic law, like the Cultural Heritage Act and the Natural Park Act. So it's pretty safe place in terms of this legal protection. The changes is that everybody in the world now can know the Namhansansong as World Heritage. So the cultural value itself is much more important to changes, I think.
So the site will be the 11th item on UNESCO's World Heritage List. What other places or items do you think the world should know about, and what are our prospects in the future?
So concerning about the history of Korea and also our difficulties after Korean War, now we have 11 World Heritage sites. You should be proud of that. So this is actually reflecting the power of our culture. So that's what I think, yes.
Okay.
All right, well, thank you so much for sharing your insight and time with us tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. The Ukrainian government says it has launched a full-scale military operations against pro-Russian rebels as security forces there try to retake eastern part of the country.
With more on that, we now turn to Paul Yi, who's standing by at the news center. Paul, this declaration by Kiev comes just hours after a fragile ceasefire ended. What kind of action does the military plan to take?
While speaking in Parliament on Tuesday, Ukraine's leader said the armed forces renewed what they called an anti-terrorist operation, which would include airstrikes against separatist strongholds in eastern regions. Government officials and rebel fighters have blamed each other for repeatedly violating the extended ceasefire agreement, which resulted in the deaths of 27 Ukrainian servicemen. President Petro Poroshenko said he decided to call off the ceasefire on Monday as Russia showed no concrete steps to de-escalate the crisis, prompting Ukraine to go on the offensive. The French presidential office had said Kiev and Moscow agreed to continue work on a long-term bilateral ceasefire following four-way talks among leaders of Ukraine, Russia, France, and Germany. And heading back to Asia, Hong Kong celebrated the 17th anniversary of its return to China with an official flag-raising ceremony near Victoria Harbour on this Tuesday. The ceremony was attended by some 2,500 spectators, including leading Chinese government officials. Hong Kong's chief executive said the former British colony had enjoyed the benefits of having two systems under one country. At the same time, tens of thousands of protesters have begun to gather for what organizers say could be the city's largest pro-democracy rally in over a decade. The move is focused on pressuring Beijing for greater freedoms to directly elect their own leaders. The massive protest comes just days after an unprecedented 800,000 residents voted in an unofficial referendum for democratic reforms. And U.S. auto giant General Motors has announced it is recalling more than 8 million vehicles in North America due to problems with its ignition switches. According to GM officials, the recall-related repairs will cost upwards of $1.2 billion for the company. The recall affects 6 models produced between 1997 and 2014, bringing the total number of cars recalled to 29 million. The announcement came just hours after GM unveiled its victim compensation fund over a controversial cover-up of its ignition switch defects. The terms of the compensation fund will have no upper cap and identifies 13 deaths linked to faulty switches. GM is recommending that drivers of the recalled models take everything off their keychain, as the extra weight could accidentally turn off the engine, along with the car's power steering and brakes. And finally, Forbes magazine has released its annual list of the world's most popular and powerful celebrities, with American artist Beyoncé taking the top spot. The 32-year-old singer was able to bump entertainment mogul Oprah Winfrey from first place last year to fourth. Forbes credited Beyoncé's rise to her massive concert tour and string of music chart hits, which raked in an estimated $115 million over the past 12 months. Basketball star LeBron James jumped from 16th to 2nd place this year thanks to endorsement deals worth $72 million. But the most impressive rise on the list was rapper Dr. Dre, who came in at number 3. The 49-year-old co-founder of Beats Entertainment climbed from the 63rd spot by earning $620 million in 2014, thanks to his recent deal with Apple. And that wraps up our look at international stories making headlines around the world. I'll see you back here tomorrow night.
Hello and welcome to Primetime Sports. I'm Stephen Che. Starting with the World Cup, the round of 16 continues. 2 matches were played on day 19, so let's kick things off with France going up against Nigeria. Now, the first half was full of chances, but it was 0-0 at halftime. Both teams were constant offensive threats, but the plays often fell short at the box. Keepers were excellent. Hugo Lloris for France and Vincent Enyeama for Nigeria. But it was a clearance error by Enyeama in the 79th minute that set up Paul Pogba's header that made it France 1-0. An own goal came in injury time, and France beat Nigeria 2-0. Next up, it was powerhouse Germany taking on long shots Algeria in Porto Alegre. Now, despite Germany playing their usual efficient game and Algeria creating exciting chances at goal, both lacked the finishing touch at the end of 90 minutes. Then early in the first half of extra time, Andre Schürrle connected a short cross into the net. Later, Mesut Özil made a double and Djabou scored for Algeria. But time runs out. Germany wins 2-1 and now faces France in the quarterfinals. And finally, Uruguay striker Luis Suarez has apologized for biting Italian defender Giorgio Chiellini in their final group stage match at the World Cup. Via his Twitter account, he issued the apology to Chiellini and, quote, the entire football family, and vowed to stop with all the biting. The Juventus defender appeared to accept the gesture, tweeting back that all was forgotten. However, there may be other factors behind the apology. There were suggestions that it was not only meant to soften FIFA's stance on their 4-month ban, which he's appealing, but also a prerequisite for a potential transfer to Barcelona. And that wraps up our look into the World Cup. This has been Stephen Che. I'll be back here later for more from the world of sports.
It was another hot and humid day here in Seoul, and nationwide showers are in store for tomorrow.
And for more, our Kim Bo-kyung joins us from the Weather Center. So, Bo-kyung, how much rain are we talking about?
Guys, monsoonal fronts are moving north, and they are set to hit the southern regions tomorrow. So those in Jeju are looking at about 20 to 60 millimeters, and 5 to 40 millimeters are in store for Jeollanam-do and Gyeongsang-nam-do provinces. Not monsoon rain, but sporadic showers are expected for Seoul and Gyeonggi-do province, so an umbrella is a must for tomorrow. At the moment, we are at the edge of a high-pressure system from the East Sea. Well, those down south will get a break from all the heat tomorrow due to the rainfall. Otherwise, monsoon rains are set to make a comeback Friday once again, only hitting the southern regions. On to Wednesday's readings. Seoul hits 31 while Gwangju and Busan reach the mid-20s. As for other places, Daejeon peaks at 28 while Jeju and Dokdo make it to 22 and 25. While over in Brazil, mostly sunny skies are forecast for Sao Paulo, so no worries of the weather getting in the way. That does it for now, but I'll be back with more after midnight.
Thanks, Bo-kyung, and that will do it for this edition of Arirang News. Thanks for watching.
And we'll see you back here the same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.